They say the best revenge is living well. But I disagree. The best revenge is disappearing completely into thin air immediately after your husband uses dinner to flatter his ex and turn you into a pathetic joke. By the time he realizes it, his fake glossy world has been dismantled by me, screw by screw. I did not just leave. I erased my existence from his life in a way that even federal agents would nod in approval. My name is Valerie. At 34 years old, I have spent the last decade assessing threats for Apex Meridian. As a risk manager, my job is to look at a glossy surface and see the cracks underneath before the structure collapses. I am disciplined. I am invisible. My husband, Garrick, calls it boring. To him, I am just the reliable scenery in the movie of his life. He is a creative director, a title that feeds his narcissism like gasoline on a fire. He loves the spotlight, the applause, and the sound of his own voice, while I prefer the quiet certainty of a balanced ledger. Serena is coming over for dinner tonight, Garrick announced this morning, fixing his hair in the mirror for the 30th time. She is in town to discuss a partnership. Big things, Valerie. Real Silicon Valley energy. Serena, the college ex, the one who got away, the one who now runs a tech startup valued at millions. I need everything perfect, he snapped, turning to me, his eyes critical as he scanned my outfit. Make that lamb dish you do, the one with the reduction, and for God's sake, wear something that doesn't scream middle management. I spent 4 hours in the kitchen. I crafted a dinner that would cost $300 a plate in the city when I finally walked out in my navy dress. Garrick sighed. It is fine, I guess, he muttered, checking his watch. Just try to keep up with the conversation. Do not bore her with your spreadsheet talk. When Serena arrived, she was a storm of designer silk and expensive perfume. She hugged Garrick a little too long and handed me a bottle of wine without making eye contact. Oh, Valerie, she said, looking around our living room with a tight smile. This is so quaint. It is adorable how you have kept things so domestic. I honestly do not know how you find the time to decorate with a full-time job. Her tone suggested that my job was a hobby and my home was a dollhouse. We sat down to eat. The lamb was perfect. Neither of them noticed. My team just closed the Series B funding, Serena said, laughing as she touched Garrick's arm. It is exhausting changing the world, but someone has to do it. Garrick looked at her with puppy dog eyes. That is the difference, isn't it? You deal in vision, Serena. You create the future. He gestured vaguely at me with his fork, a piece of meat dangling from the end. Valerie here deals in... What is it again? Honey compliance checking boxes. God, I could never do that. It is just so safe, so tedious. I cut my meat. Precise. Clean lines. Risk management is about survival, Garrick, I said softly. Survival is for people who are afraid to live, he declared, raising his glass. The wine was already hitting him. Serena gets it. We were always on the same wavelength. Then came the moment that severed the final thread. Garrick leaned back, looking between us, a smirk playing on his lips. You know, he said, staring right into my eyes but seeing only Serena. I was thinking about our senior year. If I had chosen you back then, Serena. If we had stayed together. Imagine where we would be. We would be the power couple of this entire city. Unstoppable. The room went silent. The air conditioner hummed. He had just told his wife, to her face, that he regretted marrying her. He had just stripped me naked of my dignity in front of the woman he wished he was with. I waited for the tears. They did not come. Instead, a cold clarity washed over me. It was absolute zero. That is quite a thought, I said. My voice was steady. More wine. God, yes, Garrick laughed, oblivious. Pour it up, Val. I filled their glasses. I watched them drink. I watched them laugh about inside jokes from 15 years ago. They thought I was the meek little wife, fading into the wallpaper. They did not see that I was no longer looking at my husband. I was looking at a liability. As they moved to the living room to continue their self-congratulatory festival, I stood at the sink, washing the china. The warm water ran over my hands. I scrubbed a spot of gravy off a plate. Garrick was not just an asshole. He was a cancer. And as any good risk manager knows, you do not ignore a tumor. You cut it out immediately. I dried my hands. The marriage was over. Now, the liquidation would begin. The house was silent, save for the rhythmic, heavy breathing of a man who had drunk too much expensive wine and satisfied his ego at his wife's expense. Garrick was passed out in our master bedroom, sprawled across the sheets like a conqueror. I stood in the doorway for a moment, watching him. I felt absolutely nothing. No anger, no sadness. Just the cold, clinical detachment of a surgeon preparing for an amputation. I did not pack a suitcase. Suitcases have zippers that hiss and wheels that rumble. I needed silence. I took my sturdy leather work backpack and filled it with only the essentials. Passport, birth certificate, social security card, the external hard drive containing the backup of my entire digital life. Finally. I opened the velvet box in the back of the safe and took out the emerald set my grandmother had left me. It was the only thing of value in this house that Garrick had not tried to leverage for a loan. I sat down at the kitchen island and opened my laptop. The blue light of the screen was the only illumination in the dark room. It was time to execute the financial partition. I logged into our joint savings account. The number on the screen was substantial, the result of my bonuses and his commissions. Strict adherence to protocol, I whispered to myself, my fingers flying across the keyboard. I calculated exactly 50% of the total balance. Not a penny more, not a penny less. I initiated the transfer to the offshore holding account I had set up 3 years ago, a safety net I had prayed I would never need. The progress bar loaded, complete, next. I pulled up the credit card portal. I located the 3 supplementary cards Garrick carried in his wallet, the ones linked to my primary credit line. Declined. I murmured as I clicked the deactivate button on each one. Access denied. Garrick. I closed the laptop and walked over to the dining table. The bill for the premium ingredients I had bought for tonight's dinner sat there. It was over $300. I placed my diamond wedding band directly on top of the total amount. Beside it, I laid the house key. Then, I took my phone, used a paperclip to pop the tray open, and removed the SIM card. I snapped the small plastic chip in half and dropped the pieces into the garbage disposal. There was one last digital footprint to scrub. I went into the living room and picked up the MacBook that Garrick often borrowed to watch movies or check his emails. I initiated a factory reset. I stood there, watching the Apple logo fill up, ensuring that every password, every photo, and every cookie was being obliterated. When the screen finally flashed to the Hello Setup prompt, I knew the slate was clean. It was 3 in the morning when I slipped into the garage. I did not turn on the lights. I got into my sedan and engaged the neutral gear, letting gravity roll the car down the driveway before I started the engine. I drove straight to the international airport, 40 minutes away. I parked the car in the long-term lot, Section C, a place where vehicles go to be forgotten for weeks. Anyone looking for me would assume I had caught the first flight to Europe or Asia. Instead, I walked to the arrivals terminal and hailed a taxi. "Where to, ma'am?" the driver asked, eyeing my lack of luggage. "The north suburbs," I replied. "Take the back roads." I had rented a small, nondescript studio apartment 2 towns over using a prepaid debit card and a fake name I had established years ago for privacy testing. As the taxi rumbled away from the city, I pulled out a burner phone and sent a single email to the HR director at Apex Meridian. I cited a severe personal emergency involving a distant relative and requested indefinite unpaid leave. My career was solid. They would hold my spot. By the time the taxi dropped me off, the sky was turning a pale, bruised purple. I unlocked the door to my temporary sanctuary and locked it behind me. I was a ghost. I had no location, no active phone number, and no digital trail. I walked to the window and watched the sun crest over the horizon. I expected to feel terrified. I expected to feel the crushing weight of a failed marriage. But as the first rays of light hit my face, I took a deep breath. My chest expanded, free of the tightness that had been there for years. It was the sweetest breath I had ever taken. I was not sad. I was light. I was free. I knew exactly how Garrick's morning began because I had lived it for 5 years. He woke up at 10 in the morning with a wine headache, rolling over to the empty side of the bed. "Valerie, coffee." He would have shouted it at the ceiling, expecting the smell of roasted beans to magically appear. When silence was the only answer, he finally dragged himself out of bed, downstairs. He found the dining table exactly as I had left it. The bill, the key, the ring. Most men would panic. Garrick just scoffed. I could practically hear his internal monologue. "She is pulling a stunt. She wants me to chase her. How desperate." He picked up his phone. Since my SIM card was currently in pieces in the garbage disposal, I did not receive the text, but I saw it sync to the cloud account I was mirroring on my laptop. "Do not be such a child, Valerie. Whatever point you are trying to prove, you have made it. Be home before dinner. I have a headache." He went to work believing he was still the king of his castle. The first crack in his delusion appeared at noon. I received a notification on my dashboard, "Transaction declined, Le Petit Bistro. $140. Garrick was at lunch with a potential client. He had tried to pay with the supplementary American Express, the one attached to my credit score. He likely tried the second card. Declined, then the third, declined. I imagined the waiter's polite, pitying smile and the client's awkward shuffling. Garrick would have been forced to use his own debit card, the one linked to our joint account. That was when he checked the balance. The login timestamp on the banking app showed 12:30 in the afternoon. He stared at the number. 50% of the liquid assets were gone, vanished, legally transferred by the joint owner. He started dialing. First my number, which went straight to a dead signal. Then, in a fit of desperation, he called my mother. I had warned her. "I do not know where she is. Garrick," my mother told him, her voice cool and detached. "But knowing you, she is probably somewhere celebrating." She hung up before he could scream. By evening, the reality of his new life began to set in. The smart home cameras, which I still had remote access to, showed him wandering around the kitchen. The sink was full of dirty dishes from his breakfast. The hamper was overflowing. There was no dinner waiting, no aroma of herbs, just the cold, sterile hum of the refrigerator. He had to microwave a frozen burrito, eating it while standing up over the sink. Then, Serena messaged him. "Hey, handsome, still on for the contract review tomorrow. How is the little wife?" Garrick stared at the phone. He could not tell the woman he was trying to impress that his boring, safe wife had left him and taken half the treasury. "Valerie is down with a terrible flu," he typed back, lying through his teeth. "It is contagious. Best we meet at your hotel lobby tomorrow." He needed sympathy, but he could not admit defeat. So, he turned to his audience. He opened Facebook and posted a black background with white text. Sometimes, no matter how much you provide, some people just do not understand the pressure of greatness. Sad. I sat in my dimly lit rental apartment, eating a cup of instant noodles that cost $1. My setup was humble, but my view was omnipotent. I watched his status update get 3 likes. I watched him pace the living room on the security feed. He looked small. He looked confused. "Enjoy the silence, Garrick," I whispered. I minimized the camera window and opened a new folder on my hard drive. I had named it The Pandora Files. It was time to stop looking at the domestic fallout and start looking at the forensic evidence. The fun was just beginning. I sat at the small, wobbly desk in my rental apartment, the glow of the laptop screen illuminating the room in a harsh blue light. I had the backup drive plugged in. For 5 years, I had been the wife who blindly signed where he pointed, trusting his creative genius with our portfolio. Tonight, the wife was gone. The senior risk manager was clocking in. I opened the folder labeled tax returns and cross-referenced it with his credit reports. The math did not add up. Garrick liked to brag about his six-figure bonuses. But the ledger told a story of hemorrhage. He was spending 20% more than he earned every single month. Leased luxury cars, designer suits, dinners that cost $400 a head. He was not rich. He was drowning in debt and using credit cards to bail out the water. "You are such a cliché, Garrick," I muttered, opening the bank statements. Then I saw it. A series of recurring transfers from his company's expense accounts into an external entity called Project Phoenix. It sounded impressive. Exactly the kind of pretentious name Garrick would choose. I dug deeper. I ran a search on the business registration. The registered address was a P.W.A.T. box in a strip mall in Nevada. The sole signatory, an LLC that traced back to a digital wallet Garrick controlled. He was billing his own company, Apex Meridian, for consulting services provided by Project Phoenix services that never existed. He was embezzling funds from his own employer to fund the lifestyle he flaunted in their faces. I kept clicking, my stomach churning not from sadness, but from disgust. I found a loan document dated 6 months ago. It was a second mortgage taken out on the lake house my parents had left me. I stared at the bottom of the page. There, in black ink, was my signature. It was a good forgery, but I knew I had never signed it. He had committed felony fraud against his own wife to keep his house of cards standing. "How dare you?" I hissed, my hand trembling over the mouse. "That was my father's house. You had no right." Suddenly, the dinner with Serena made perfect, terrible sense. Garrick did not want to collaborate with her because he respected her vision. He did not invite her over to reminisce about old times. He needed fresh capital. The hole in the accounts of Project Phoenix was getting too big to hide. He was going to pitch her some vaporware idea, take her investment money, and use it to plug the leak before the auditors at Apex Meridian noticed the missing $200,000. Serena was not a guest. She was a mark. I sat back in the cheap plastic chair. I had not married a misunderstood genius. I had married a white-collar criminal, a fraudster who was willing to rob his wife and deceive his friends to keep buying Italian leather shoes. I stopped trembling. Emotion was a liability. Evidence was an asset. I opened a new spreadsheet. I began to organize the data chronologically. Exhibit A, the shell company formation. Exhibit B, the unauthorized transfers. Exhibit C, the forged mortgage documents. I linked every bank statement, every IP address login, every digital fingerprint he thought he had wiped clean. I built a timeline that was unbreakable. By the time I finished, the sun was coming up. I looked at the file on my screen. It was not just grounds for divorce. It was an indictment. "I am not just leaving you, Garrick," I said to the empty room, my voice hard as stone. "I am going to help the law finish what you started." 7 days had passed since I walked out the door, and the immaculate home I used to keep had devolved into a frat house. Through the security cameras, I watched Garrick kick a pile of laundry aside to search the frantic mess of his home office. He was tearing drawers open and dumping their contents onto the floor. Where are they? Where the hell? Did she put the tax binders? He screamed at the empty room, his voice cracking. He needed the filings for the last 3 years to show Serena's lawyers, proof of his liquidity. But he could not find them because I was the one who filed them, and I was the one who took them. The private investigator he hired called him that afternoon. I had a tap on Garrick's phone line, so I listened to the conversation while I ate my lunch. "I am sorry, Mr. Vance," the investigator said, sounding tired. "She is not using her credit cards. She is not on any flight manifests. No cell tower pings. It is like she just evaporated." "That is impossible," Garrick shouted into the receiver. "She is a risk manager, not a spy. Find her. But the walls were closing in. Serena was no longer flirting. She was demanding. She texted him every hour. Garrick, my team needs the due diligence documents by close of business. Stop stalling. Or is there no money? Desperate. Garrick tried to do what he always did, fake it. I watched him on the laptop camera as he opened a PDF editor, trying to doctor a bank statement to show a healthy balance instead of the crater I had left behind. But Garrick was an ideas man, not a details man. He missed the font match. He miscalculated the running totals. It was a sloppy, amateurish attempt at fraud that any junior analyst would spot in 10 seconds. When he realized he could not produce the documents, he decided to change the narrative. He went on Facebook. He posted a photo of himself looking disheveled and tragic, with a caption that made my stomach turn. My wife walked out on me without a word, no explanation, just abandoned our life together. I am trying to stay strong, but the cruelty of some people is unimaginable. Within minutes, the comments section was filled with sympathy from our social circle. My old phone number, which was currently sitting in a landfill, was bombarded with text messages from mutual friends calling me heartless, cold, and selfish. I deleted the notifications without reading them. Their opinions were irrelevant. I had work to do. I put on a baseball cap and sunglasses and walked to a post office 3 towns over. I held 2 thick manila envelopes in my hands. The first was addressed to the Internal Audit Department at Apex Meridian, marked Strictly Confidential. Inside were the logs of every dollar Garrick had siphoned into his shell company. The second envelope was addressed to the fraud department of the bank holding the mortgage on my parents' lake house. Inside was an affidavit stating that my signature on the loan documents was a forgery, accompanied by forensic handwriting samples. Priority mail, I told the clerk. Overnight delivery. The next morning, the first domino fell. Garrick was in the kitchen, trying to scrape burnt eggs off a pan, when his phone rang. It was the bank. Mr. Vance. The voice on the other end was stern. We have received a fraud alert regarding the mortgage on the lakefront property. We have been notified that the co-signer's signature was falsified. We are freezing all accounts associated with this loan pending a federal investigation. Garrick dropped the spatula. It clattered against the floor. His face went gray, the blood draining from it instantly. He stood there, paralyzed, the phone trembling against his ear. That is a mistake, he stammered, sweat breaking out on his forehead. My wife, she is just... We have the affidavit, sir. The banker cut him off. We are legally obligated to report this to the authorities. Garrick slowly lowered the phone. He looked up, staring directly into the lens of the security camera in the corner of the ceiling. For the first time, he was not looking at a piece of technology. He was looking at me. Valerie, he whispered, his eyes wide with terror. He finally understood. I was not just missing. I was not sulking in a hotel room waiting for an apology. I was the one pulling the trigger. Monday morning arrived with the crushing weight of inevitable consequence. I sat in my rental apartment, refreshing the internal company server logs I still had access to. At 9 a.m, Garrick was in the middle of his weekly strategy meeting, undoubtedly taking credit for work he had not done. Then, the door opened. It was not a client. It was the Director of Human Resources, flanked by 2 stone-faced members of the internal audit team. Mr. Vance, the director said, her voice cutting through the room like a guillotine blade. Please step away from the computer and come with us immediately. Garrick laughed, a nervous, hollow sound. I am in the middle of a pitch. Linda, can this wait? Now, Mr. Vance, she repeated. They marched him into a glass-walled conference room where the dossier I had mailed was spread across the table. They did not waste time. The head auditor pointed to a flowchart, the one I had color-coded to show exactly how money flowed from Apex Meridian into the hollow shell of Project Phoenix. This is embezzlement. Garrick, the auditor stated flatly. Corporate theft. Fraud. We have the chat logs. We have the IP addresses. We know you approved these invoices from your personal laptop. That is a lie. Garrick stammered, his face turning a blotchy red. I have no idea what Project Phoenix is. It must be one of my subordinates. They used my login. I am being set up. We checked the login timestamps. The auditor replied, sliding a piece of paper forward. They correspond exactly to times when you were logged into the building's Wi-Fi on weekends when no one else was here. You are suspended, effective immediately. Security will escort you out. They did not even let him pack a box. 2 burly security guards flanked him, gripping his arms as if he were a volatile prisoner. They marched him past the rows of cubicles. The office, usually buzzing with chatter, fell into a dead silence. Dozens of eyes people he had bullied, ignored, or belittled watched him being dragged away. The elevator doors opened in the lobby, and the universe decided to deliver the punchline. Serena was standing there. She was dressed in a white power suit, holding a leather portfolio, ready to sign the investment deal Garrick had been begging for. She looked up, her smile freezing as she saw her college flame being manhandled by security. "Garrick?" she asked, her voice echoing in the cavernous lobby. "What? What is happening? Serena!" Garrick shouted, trying to shake off the guard's grip. Tell them we are partners, tell them who I am." Serena looked at the guards, then at Garrick's desperate, sweating face. She was a shark in the business world. She could smell blood in the water instantly. She looked at the auditors following behind. "Is he being arrested?" she asked one of them. "Pending an investigation into financial fraud, ma'am," the auditor replied discreetly. The realization hit Serena like a physical blow. Her eyes narrowed. "You were not bringing me in as a partner," she hissed, stepping closer to him. "You were trying to use my capital to cover your theft. You were going to steal from me too." "No, Serena, please. It is a misunderstanding." Slap, the sound was sharp and loud, stopping everyone in the lobby in their tracks. Serena had struck him across the face with enough force to leave a mark. "Do not you dare," she seethed, her voice trembling with rage, "ever speak my name again. If you come near my company, I will bury you under so many lawsuits you will never see the sun." She spun on her heel and walked out, leaving him humiliated in the center of the room. By noon, the story was on every industry blog. The creative genius was now the corporate thief. Garrick took a taxi home, defeated. He walked up the driveway, likely planning to collapse into bed and hide from the world. He jammed his key into the front door lock. It did not turn. He tried again. Nothing. Attached to the door was a bright orange sticker. Notice of seizure. The bank had moved faster than he anticipated. Between the credit card default, the unauthorized second mortgage, and the fraud alert, they had exercised their right to secure the asset. I watched it all on my laptop screen. The camera above the porch showed Garrick rattling the door handle, screaming at the wood, kicking the frame until he collapsed on the welcome mat with his head in his hands. I picked up my mug of Earl Grey tea. It was still hot. I took a slow and deliberate sip, savoring the bergamot flavor. Karma is not a bitch. She is a risk manager. Garrick was living out of a cheap motel near the interstate when my lawyer finally reached out to him. He had nowhere else to go. His company email was locked, his bank accounts were frozen, and his friends were pretending he was dead. The email was simple, a location and a time. It was an invitation to his own execution, and he had no choice but to attend. I was already seated in the conference room of the law firm when he arrived. The room was all glass and steel, situated on the 42nd floor, looking down on the city that Garrick thought he owned just a week ago. When the door opened, the contrast between us was violent. Garrick looked like a ghost. His designer shirt was wrinkled, his face was unshaven, and there were dark, bruised circles under his eyes. He looked small. I, on the other hand, had shed the skin of the frazzled housewife. I was wearing a charcoal gray suit, tailored to within a millimeter of perfection. My hair was pulled back in a sharp, sleek bun. I did not look like his wife. I looked like the risk manager who had just identified a catastrophic threat. "Valerie," Garrick breathed out, stumbling toward the table. He tried to summon his old charm, that manipulative warmth he used to control me, but it cracked in his throat. "Thank God. Baby, this has all been a terrible mistake. You have to stop this. You have to tell them." He reached for my hand across the table. I did not move mine, but my lawyer, Mr. Henderson, cleared his throat loudly. Garrick flinched and pulled back. "We are married, Val," Garrick pleaded, his voice trembling. "You took a vow, for better or for worse. You cannot just destroy me like this. I am your husband." "You were my husband," I corrected him, my voice as calm as a flatline. "Now, you are a liability that I am writing off." "You are being hysterical," he snapped, a flash of his old arrogance surfacing through the fear. "So I moved some money around. Everyone does it. I did it for us to build our empire. If you testify against me, you go down too. You signed those tax returns." I reached into my pocket and pulled out a small silver USB drive. I placed it gently on the polished mahogany table. It made a soft click that sounded like a gunshot in the silent room. "Do you remember the dinner, Garrick?" I asked. "Do you remember checking my wrist to see if I was wearing the expensive watch you bought me? I wasn't. I was wearing my smartwatch. And I hit record the moment you started comparing me to Serena." I nodded to my lawyer, who plugged the drive into his laptop. Garrick's voice filled the room, loud and clear. "Valerie, she is safe. Boring. But guys like us, Serena, we know how to play the game. Those auditors at Apex are idiots. I moved $50,000 right under their noses last month into Project Phoenix, and they thanked me for it. It is not stealing if you are smarter than the system." Garrick's face went white. It was not just an admission of infidelity or cruelty, it was a confession to a felony, recorded in his own voice, bragging about his crime to a third party. "This is not just a divorce negotiation. Garrick," I said, leaning forward slightly, "this is my alibi, and it is your death sentence." "No," he whispered, shaking his head. "No, you wouldn't." Mr. Henderson slid a thick stack of documents across the table. "Here is the offer. Mr. Vance, you assume 100% of the marital debt. You admit sole liability for the fraud to protect my client from any fallout. You sign the divorce papers today, granting a full dissolution of the marriage with no contest. In exchange, Valerie hands this recording over to the authorities as part of a plea deal for herself, rather than releasing it to the press immediately." Garrick looked at the papers, then at me. He looked for a shred of the woman who used to cook him dinner and iron his shirts. He found only a stranger. "If I don't sign," he asked weakly, "then I release the recording to the public and the prosecutor simultaneously." I replied, "You will not just go to jail. You will be a pariah. You will be the laughingstock of the industry forever." He realized he was trapped. The walls had closed in. He picked up the pen, his hand shaking so violently that he could barely hold it. He signed his name. Then he signed again. As the ink dried on the page that ended our marriage, a single tear rolled down his cheek and splashed onto the paper. "I loved you, you know," he choked out, looking up at me with wet, red eyes. I stood up, smoothing down my jacket. I looked at his tears and felt absolutely nothing. No pity, no satisfaction, just the efficiency of a job well done. "No, Garrick," I said, turning to walk out the door. "You only loved yourself. I just held the mirror." The headline on the local business chronicle was brutal. It read, "The Icarus of Apex, How Arrogance Toppled a Creative Director." It was the kind of sensational journalism that Garrick used to love when it was about someone else. But now his face was plastered next to the word fraud in bold, red letters. I sat in a coffee shop 3 towns away, reading the article on my tablet. The press did not just report the crime. They dissected his character. They interviewed former interns he had mistreated and waiters he had stiffed on tips. The narrative was clear. This was not a tragic mistake. It was the inevitable collapse of a man who thought he was a god. Then came Serena. I had to give her credit. She knew how to spin a disaster. She appeared on a popular business news segment that evening to protect her brand. She looked perfect, somber but strong, sitting across from the interviewer. "I feel betrayed," Serena said, looking directly into the camera with practiced vulnerability. "Garrett came to me with a partnership proposal. He used our shared history to manipulate my trust. I had no idea." Absolutely no idea that the money he was soliciting was intended to cover up his own corporate theft. "I am just glad I found out before my investors were hurt." She was lying. Of course. She knew he was shady the moment she walked into our house, but she had played along because she wanted a piece of the action. Now that the ship was sinking, she was not just jumping off. She was the one firing the torpedoes to ensure it went down. The legal system moved with a speed that terrified Garrick. The district attorney charged him with multiple counts of wire fraud, embezzlement, and identity theft. My lawyer told me that given the amount of money involved, over $200,000, and the premeditated nature of the crime, the prosecutors were not offering a plea deal of probation. They were seeking 3 to 5 years in federal prison. Our marital home, the stage where he had performed his little play of success, was foreclosed upon. It went up for auction to pay back the bank and the creditors. I did not attend the sale. I had a more important meeting. I sat in a sterile office at the bank headquarters, facing a team of loan officers. I laid out the forensic handwriting analysis report I had commissioned. "As you can see," I told them, pointing to the loops on the signature page. "The pressure points on the pen strokes do not match my natural writing style. This was a tracing. If you attempt to seize my family's lake house based on a forged document, I will sue this institution for negligence in verification." The bank manager looked at the report, then at me. He knew I was right. "We will release the lien on the lake property. Ms. Vance, we apologize for the oversight." While I was securing my future, Garrick was losing his past. The social circle he valued so much evaporated overnight. The friends who had drunk his wine and laughed at his jokes began scrubbing their Instagram feeds. Photos of them with Garrick disappeared one by one, replaced by self-righteous posts about integrity and honesty. He was radioactive. Garrick was released on bail pending his trial, but he had no home and no money. I heard through the grapevine that he was renting a room in a basement apartment in the worst part of the city. The man who refused to eat anything but organic steak was now working as a day laborer for a moving company, carrying heavy boxes for minimum wage just to afford instant noodles. One night, my old phone number, which I had deactivated but still monitored via a cloud log, received a single text message. "I am so sorry. Val, please. I am scared. Call me." I stared at the words on my screen. A month ago, that text would have made me cry. Now, it just looked like letters on a screen. I deleted the log without replying. That number did not exist anymore, and neither did the woman who used to answer it. I sold my sedan and combined the cash with my savings and the equity I had liquidated. I did not stay in the city. I moved 200 miles south to a small coastal town. I bought a modest condo with a balcony that smelled of salt water. I updated my LinkedIn profile, removing the gap in my employment. I landed a job as a senior strategist at a logistics firm that valued precision over flashiness. During the final interview, the CEO looked at my resume. "You have an incredible eye for detail, Valerie," he said. "We need someone who can see the problems before they happen." "That is my specialty," I replied with a genuine smile. "I fix problems, and sometimes I remove them entirely." It has been exactly 365 days since I drove out of that garage and into the rest of my life. The ocean breeze here is different from the stagnant, recycled air of the suburbs. It is sharper, cleaner. I have changed too. I cut my hair short, a sharp bob that frames a face that no longer looks down when people speak to me. I walk into rooms chin up, shoulders back, radiating the kind of quiet authority that comes from walking through fire and not getting burned. The news arrived on a Tuesday morning while I was drinking my coffee on the balcony. It was a simple news alert on my tablet. Former creative director Garrick Vance sentenced to 4 years in federal prison for wire fraud and embezzlement. I stared at the headline. 4 years. It seemed like a fair trade. He stole 5 years of my life. The government was taking 4 of his. Later that afternoon, I attended the Coastal Economic Summit at the Convention Center downtown. It was a gathering of new businesses and investors, a far cry from the high-stakes Shark Tanks of Silicon Valley. I was there representing my new firm, feeling completely in my element when I saw her, Serena. She was standing near the buffet table, but the glow was gone. The arrogant, untouchable aura she had worn like armor at my dinner table had cracked. She looked tired. Her clothes were still expensive, but they looked like armor she was weary of wearing. It turned out the scandal had splashed onto her too. Investors do not like startup founders who associate with convicted fraudsters. She had been forced to relocate, to start over in a smaller pond, just like me. She saw me across the room. For a moment, she looked like she wanted to run. Then, she took a deep breath and walked over. "Valerie," she said. Her voice lacked that condescending trill she used to have. "You look incredible." "Hello, Serena?" I replied, my voice cool and polite. "I see you are expanding your network." She flinched slightly. I wanted to say I am sorry," she stammered, looking down at her glass of water. "About that night. About everything. I was awful." I sipped my drink, waiting. "To be honest," she continued, looking up with a strange vulnerability, "I was jealous. I looked at your house, your stability, and I hated it because my life was just chaos and pressure. So I joined in when Garrick started mocking you. It made me feel superior. It was cruel." "It was," I agreed. "But I accept your apology. Serena, we all do what we must to survive." She looked relieved, but then she hesitated. "I visited him," she said quietly. "Garrick, before the sentencing, he is a mess, Valerie. But the thing is, he is still so angry. He keeps screaming that it was just bad luck. He tells everyone that you just stumbled onto those papers by accident. He thinks you just got lucky finding that one slip-up in his files." I felt a smile tug at the corner of my lips. It was not a warm smile. "He thinks I got lucky," I asked softly. "Yes," Serena nodded. "He says if he hadn't left that one folder on the desk, you would never have known." I laughed. It was a genuine, dark laugh. Of course. Even at rock bottom, his ego would not let him believe that his boring, safe wife had outsmarted him. He had to believe it was a cosmic accident. "Thank you for telling me that, Serena," I said. "Enjoy the conference." I walked away, leaving her confused in the middle of the crowd. That night, I sat at my desk. I opened a drawer and pulled out a single sheet of paper I had saved for this exact moment. It was not a letter of hate. It was not a gloating manifesto. It was something far more devastating. I took a pen and wrote a single sentence on a sticky note attached to the document. Luck had nothing to do with it. I folded the paper, slid it into an envelope, and addressed it to the correctional facility where Garrick would be spending the next 48 months. The document inside was a bank statement, but it was not from the month I left. It was dated 3 years ago. It was the first piece of the puzzle, the smoking gun that proved I had not just reacted to his betrayal. I had been waiting for it. Garrick thought I caught him because he slipped up. He was about to learn that I had been watching him build his own cage from the very first bar he laid down. You see, that document wasn't the one the prosecutors used to convict him. It was a private ledger, one that only I had access to. You see, Garrick thought he was a genius hiding money in a shell company. What he did not know was that I had set up a mirror algorithm on our joint accounts 3 years ago. the very same week he registered Project Phoenix. I knew about his little slush fund from day one. I did not expose him then because the amount was too small, and the betrayal was not yet ripe. A good risk manager does not panic at the first sign of a tremor. She waits for the earthquake to ensure the structure falls exactly where she wants it to. For 36 months, every time Garrick transferred $1,000 into Project Phoenix thinking he was being slick, my automated system quietly swept 80% of it out the back door. But I did not steal it. That would have made me a criminal like him. Instead, I donated it. I set up a recurring, anonymous donation in Garrick's name to the St. Jude's Home for Orphans. Garrick hated charity. He used to call it a tax on the successful for the benefit of the lazy. I imagined him sitting in his concrete cell, reading the line items. He would realize that the nest egg he thought he was building for his new life with Serena, nearly $150,000, had not been seized by the government. It had been voluntarily given away to feed and clothe parentless children. No, I could hear his voice in my head, cracking with impotent rage. No, she didn't. She couldn't. He would be screaming at the walls, banging his fists until his knuckles bled. The money was gone, and worse, he was technically a hero to a bunch of orphans he despised. It was the ultimate joke. I had used his greed to perform a saintly act, and I had claimed the tax deductions on our joint returns for 3 years to fund my own escape account. I stood on the balcony of my new condo, watching the Atlantic Ocean churn against the rocks. My phone vibrated. It was the email I had been waiting for. Divorce decree finalized. Status single. I took a deep breath. The salt air filled my lungs. I was no longer Garrick's wife. I was no longer the boring paper pusher. I was Valerie Vance, the woman who had turned a domestic tragedy into a tactical masterpiece. My phone rang again. This time, it was a voice call. I recognized the area code. It was the headquarters of Sterling Corp., Garrick's fiercest competitor in the city, Ms. Vance. The CEO's voice was warm. "We heard about how you handled the audit at Apex. That kind of forensic foresight is rare. We want you as our new director of strategy. Name your salary." I smiled. "I will see you on Monday." I walked into the glass skyscraper the next week, my heels clicking a rhythm of absolute victory on the marble floor. I wore a crimson suit that demanded attention. I did not look back. The old Valerie was dead, shed like a dry snakeskin that had served its purpose. I was stronger, sharper, and unbreakable. As the elevator doors closed, shutting out the world, I caught my reflection in the polished steel. Never invite your ex to dinner to humiliate your wife, because you never know if the woman sitting across from you, smiling as she cuts her steak, is holding the knife to cut the meat or to cut off your lifeline. Thank you so much for listening to this story. I am curious to know where you are tuning in from. Today, are you listening while cooking, driving, or just relaxing at home? Please comment below to share your thoughts and connect with our community. If you enjoyed Valerie's calculated revenge, please subscribe to the Lily Revenge Stories channel, like this video, and smash that hype button so this story can reach even more people. Your support means the world to us.